Hey guys, and welcome along to a shiny new edition of This Week in Photography. In this edition, we look at the crackdown on public photography. Luminar Neo goes modular. Nikon pulled the plug on DSLR cameras, and just when we were getting all depressed and shit, it's the Comedy Photo of the Year Awards. Over the last decade or so, many of the freedoms that we thought were basic rights have been eroded. Here in Australia and elsewhere in the world, photography has been in the crosshairs of governments and other organisations, and you can get into a lot of trouble for taking a photograph in the wrong place or of the wrong person. Egypt's been a popular tourist destination for as long as there has been tourism. Back in the day, my English predecessors would go on an extended foreign vacation called the Grand Tour, no relation to the show, in which they would be staggeringly patronising to the locals whilst admiring the famous sights of the old world. The pyramids of Egypt were a draw card then, and they still are today. However, if you're planning on visiting Egypt, you better make sure you don't take a photo that is offensive to the country, because you could end up in all sorts of strife. And while the new laws around photography supposedly pertain mainly to journalists and news organisations, it's pretty clear that they count YouTube channels and Instagram feeds as journalism too, so watch out. Subjects that are deemed offensive to the country include any photos of children and photos of any citizen for whom you do not have written consent. So forget indulging in a bit of street photography, because you could end up in the kind of jail where dropping the soap is the least of your worries. The clear aim of these new laws is an attempt by Egyptian authorities to clamp down on any photos or video that makes them look bad. So if you value your equipment and possibly your liberty as well, do not expect it to be like it is back home. My advice is to steer clear of Egypt completely. Meanwhile, over in the land of the free and the home of the brave, the state of Arizona has just made it illegal to photograph a cop up close. That's right, if you fancy indulging in a bit of citizen journalism and decide to get your smartphone out within 8 feet of an Arizona cop who is going about his duties, you'll probably end up with the road surface in your face and spend 30 days in the county jail. The reason for this law is obvious. They don't want a George Floyd type situation on their patch. So rather than fix their brutal policing situation, they'd rather clamp down on the civil liberties of American citizens. Thanks, Big Brother. In case you think I just like sticking the boot in for the Yanks, I would just like to point out that things aren't entirely rosy here in Australia either. While we don't suffer so badly from that whole militarised cop thing, the boys in blue still have their moments here, believe me. Back in September 21, during the anti-lockdown protests in Victoria, a photographer from the Age newspaper copped a full blast of pepper spray right in the face. And while he had identified himself as a media representative, it could be argued, I suppose, that the pepper spray was an unfortunate mistake by a cop under stress. The only problem with that narrative was that the poor journalist copped it in the face twice. Whoops. Yes, despite the fact that he was carrying 3 fucking great cameras and wearing media accreditation, the cop, enjoying a lovely little power trip, showed an impressive lack of favouritism and did the photojournalist just like he did the crazies on the march. The photographer filed an official complaint, like you do, and this week he received a payout of several $1,000s from Victoria Police. No word on what happened to the cop yet, but given the way things are going lately, I can only assume he received a promotion and a nice big pay rise. Meanwhile, in the world of software, the developers of popular AI photo editing tool Luminar Neo have decided to make their software modular. Up until now, all the new features in Neo had been included as part of the main application, but that has now changed with the release of their new HDR extension. You can still buy the application on its own for 123 Australian dollars or 89 US dollars. But if you want the brand new HDR extension, then it's 192 Australian or 138 US for the bundle. And it could be argued that this is actually a sensible way of doing things, because this way they get to keep the price down and folks that want the HDR functionality can pay extra. After all, it is a fairly specialist tool, not something that all photographers use or indeed have any need for. And it's also worth pointing out that the main application is still a one-off fee, not an ongoing subscription. I'll try and get onto the guys at Skylum and see if I can arrange a review of this new HDR merge extension, and we can see whether it's worth the extra $69. So watch this space. Now, the writing's been on the wall for DSLR cameras for some time now, but the end is much more clearly in sight now as Nikon, no less, announced that they are ending development of their DSLR camera range. This is a pretty big deal, of course, since Nikon have been making DSLRs since the mid-90s. In fact, it could be argued that their D1 was the first proper DSLR in the world, since it was the first to have a pixel resolution sufficient for printing, and it didn't cost as much as a new car. Nikon were pretty slow to adopt the mirrorless format, leaving Panasonic, Leica and Sony to innovate. However, the advantages of mirrorless, in particular the reduced camera body sizes, have been a big hit with us photographers, and sales of DSLR fell year on year until it was just uneconomical to continue developing them. Now, Canon haven't formally pulled out of DSLR development yet, but they have said their focus will be on mirrorless in the long term, so it's only a matter of time. And finally, the finalists in the Comedy Pet Photo Awards 2022 have been announced. This is a fairly new Comedy Photo Award, and not to be confused with the Comedy Wildlife Photography Awards. Now, since it's all about pets, the shortlist of finalists for this year's award is, of course, dominated by photos of cats and dogs. And whilst I'm all in favour of funny animal photos, I didn't find the quality of images in this competition to be that great. They're certainly not on a par with the Comedy Wildlife Awards, so it looks like the domesticated friends aren't pulling their weight. I'll put a link to the awards down below, and you can have a squiz for yourself and see if I'm on the money or if you laughed your ass off. Alright guys, that's it for another week in photography. Have you ever run into trouble with the authorities when you're out and about using your camera? Would you risk your kit to photograph the cops? Or will you be sticking to macro shots of flowers for the foreseeable future? Let me know in the comments down below. Please remember to like this video if you got value from it. Alright guys, that's it. Till the next time. Ta-ta.